his new book, Age of Influence, Neal Schaffer digs deep into what influence really is, how influencers are made, and why they're currently a $4 billion industry, and how you can leverage them for your own business, but also how you can claim your influence, whatever shape that is. Neal also shares what makes his own business work and exactly how he shaped his business around his passion, his family, and how he makes sure he's always doing his best work. Hi there and welcome back to Amplify, the Digital Marketing Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm Bob Gentle, and every Monday I'm joined by amazing people who share what makes their business work. If you're new to the show, then take a second right now to subscribe so you don't miss new episodes, and you can grab some older ones when you're done with this one. Don't forget you can join our Facebook community. Just visit amplifyme.fm/insiders and you'll be taken right there. So welcome along and let's meet Neal. So this week I am thrilled to welcome Neal Schaffer to the show. Neal, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, Bob. It's been a long time in the making, but glad we finally made it happen today.
I know, but you nearly came on the show a year ago and then life got in the way. So yeah, I'm really excited to get a chance to finally meet you. I think I've been following you on social media probably for longer than I've been following most people. I've been following you on Twitter for a long time, and then latterly on Instagram. And I have to say, you are the king of the selfie. You've been selfieing for longer than it was a thing.
You know, I will say that I don't know if you've heard of Pam Moore. She's another one of us sort of social digital marketing consultants. And I had a chance to meet her in her hometown of Orlando, Florida, when I spoke there many years ago. And we met at a Panera Bread, a coffee shop. And I'm like, Pam, before we go, we need to do a selfie together. And I was doing it. She goes, no, Neal, you got it all wrong. So she holds up the camera way above. And then we are like, scrunching below. And so she takes it at an angle from above looking down, and it was perfect. And she's like, Neal, this is how you take a selfie. So, we all learn from others in life. And yes, ever since then, find the person with the longest arm, and then they hold it, and it's above, and you look up, and they shoot it down, and it's perfect.
So what's your position on the selfie stick?
I have had a selfie stick. I think that they are very convenient, but they can also be very obnoxious. So I would not take one with me wherever I go. But as a utilitarian tool, they can come in handy.
So before this descends into the ridiculous, which it's verging on right now, for the benefit of the listener who may not have heard of you, just a very potted history. Sort of, who are you? Where are you? What kind of work do you do? What does Neal Schaffer's world look like?
Sure. So, I suppose my world begins before social media, where for the first, 17, 18 years of my career, I was a B2B technology, sales, business development, marketing executive. I worked in Asia, so I speak Japanese and Chinese. I actually lived in Japan the first 15 years of my career, and I was in charge of really, in charge of Asia sales or Western Japan sales, or launching new sales offices in China. So I had a very, very holistic business experience of having to wear a lot of different hats and being an entrepreneur within a bigger company. For a few companies, when I came back to the United States after I got married, had a baby girl, decided to raise her here. And it was in 2008 where I was in transition for the first time in my own native United States. And my network was either in Asia or, I went to college in Massachusetts. My friends from high school in Southern California went up to Northern California. So I really didn't have a network. And I had received an invite and joined LinkedIn. I was one of their first 1 million members back in 2004. But I realized that, maybe I'll use LinkedIn to try to create this network. And it was at that time where I got really, it was, January, February 2008, where I got really active on LinkedIn. And LinkedIn used to actually be even more engaging than it is today. They had something called LinkedIn Answers. So like a Q&A, like a Quora type thing. That was brilliant. LinkedIn groups were a lot more organic and engaging. And I began to really, I was really active in that LinkedIn Answers forum, learning, but also starting to contribute my own answers, and the same in LinkedIn groups. And I began to really proactively connect with a lot of people on LinkedIn. I guess you could call me a LinkedIn open networker when it still had a good name for it. But fast forward, I ended up finding a job. And the same day that I got an offer for the job, I actually launched my first blog, which was on LinkedIn because they used to have an app platform. So I started a blog on WordPress.com. It wasn't branded. It was sort of like expert answers to your LinkedIn questions, something very general like that.
Yeah.
And then 3.5 months later, the company that hired me decided that they wanted to sell the company. They wanted to give up on international sales, and everything that I had invested just went out the window. This was also the time of the Lehman Brothers crash back in 2008, where jobs were, sort of like today, I suppose. New jobs are hard to come by. So that's when my wife had said, Neal, why don't you write a book? And I never thought I would write one, but I kept blogging after that. And at some point in 2009, I realized that I already had a good quarter of my book already written. So I pursued that path. And in 2009, I did a lot of, networking locally. I began to get asked to do speeches. And as I released that book in September 2009, those speeches became paid speeches. And then just very quickly in January 2010, I had a number of companies reach out to me wanting help with social media. And they didn't know what they didn't know. So it was up for me to decide how to service them. And I decided then that I thought what companies needed wasn't necessarily me doing their social media, but really they needed education and they also needed strategy. So I called it at the time a social media strategy consulting company. I now call it a digital marketing consultancy. And I've been doing that for 10 years. And even though my clients are on the corporate side, I still try to be very active and very social online. So, whether it's LinkedIn or Twitter or Instagram or Pinterest, Facebook, I'm actually not as active on as I probably could be. But, I try to stay active. And really what I've learned working with companies and speaking and what have you, I try to share that with my community online through blogging, podcasting, what have you. So thank you for being a loyal follower. That sort of explains sort of my philosophy as to why I'm always sort of online and very active and sharing lots of things. I originally began connecting with a lot of people on LinkedIn and writing the book because I saw social media, especially LinkedIn, as a networking vehicle that with each connection, it gives me the opportunity to learn and to share and vice versa. So if I could connect with more and more people and reach more and more people, it's just going to be a good thing for everybody. And that's been a sort of a guiding philosophy of mine that I've had for some time. So I'm always very, either proactive in reaching out to people, or when people reach out to me, like, in your case, I want to become friends and spend time and get to know them and see how we might be able to help each other. So, and here we are today.
That was a great potted history. But I think while you were speaking, I was reflecting on LinkedIn. I knew I joined LinkedIn early, and I joined in 2007, but there was no one else there. It was a complete waste of time. You wrote a book about LinkedIn in 2009 when still nobody was there. And then again, your social media strategy book in 2013. The word early sums you up quite well. And that really brings us on to the new book, which is The Age of Influence. Now, I'm going to ask you to talk about the book because there's so much in there. You were kind enough to give me a copy. I haven't gone too deep into it yet because I've had my own stuff going on. But once again, early, I thought that there must be lots of books about influencer marketing. I had a look. There are plenty on how to become an influencer, which are probably of dubious quality. But there were none about how to engage and leverage influencers, which was a real surprise. So why this book? What led you to the point where you thought, yeah, influencers, I'm going to write a book about that? Yeah. What's the story with the book, Neal?
Yeah, and there's actually another book that I wrote that, I wrote that first book about LinkedIn because at the time there were, Jason Alba had a book out. I'm on LinkedIn Now What? That was a leading book at the time about LinkedIn. Lewis Howes, who's now very famous, had just published his first book, which was about LinkedIn. And then there was mine. And I thought that those books didn't go into the detail and all the sort of tricks and hacks that I had found that I really wanted to expose for others to utilize. So that was my gift to the world at the time. 2 years later, a book like a podcast or a blog becomes part of your inbound marketing tool. And I realized I wanted to write another book. And I had half of a book about Twitter written at that time, believe it or not, back in 2011, which is probably, it might have been earlier than Mark Schaefer's Tao of Twitter, might have been about the same time. And I had just fallen in love with Twitter and found great business use from it. But I think a lot of people, once again, thought that was a waste of time. But I ended up writing a book. I wanted to write a business book because now I was doing social media for a living. And therefore, in 2011, I wrote a book called Maximizing LinkedIn for Sales and Social Media Marketing. So I was talking about things like employee advocacy and social selling before they were terms. But, and I was doing, obviously, a lot of the speeches I was doing and consulting was related to LinkedIn, but not specific to LinkedIn. So when 2013 came around, it was actually 2012, I got introduced to the acquisition editor at Wiley, this large publisher. And she was saying, Neal, what do you want to write for a book? So at the time, I actually had 3 book ideas. I could have gone back to that Twitter book. I was also, because I do a lot of business in Japan, seeing that I speak it, I was actually negotiating with a Japanese publisher to write a book on social media for executives. And the third idea was, now what I do for a living is social media strategy consulting. So I could write a book on how anybody can create a social media strategy. And immediately they said, that's the book. That's the book we want you to write. That's the book that we want you to create a platform out of. And that became Maximize Your Social, which is still, my podcast used to be called Maximize. It's now called Maximize Your Social Influence, but that's very much become a big part of my brand. So, writing the book for me, social media strategy, social media ROI back in the day was the number one question I would get asked. How do you do it? And I think there was one other book out on the subject, but it had a very, very different perspective on it, not the way that I would present the subject. So I ended up writing that book. And at the time, it's like, wow, I'm giving away all my IP, right? But for me, writing the book, and pun intended, was sort of like closing a chapter, sort of like getting closure so that I can move on to bigger and bigger fields. So by writing that book, it allowed me to really, showcase my subject matter expertise and my authority in the space, right? So fast forward, 2 years later, wanting to serve my community again, as I do a lot of speaking, I was getting asked about a lot of social media tools and technology and automation. So I actually launched a social media conference called the Social Tools Summit. It was all around tools and technology. I think this was 2015 and 16. So instead of a book, I did that. And then, 2017 came around, and, as a speaker, I realized that, when people look to hire speakers, they look for people with fresh, new content. And often that means they have a book out, right? Just came out with a new book. Let's have them speak. And it's a thing that's very, very common in the industry. And really, when 2017 came around, I thought, this is really a good time to think about what that book's going to be. And at the same time, similar to how I got asked questions about social media strategy, social media ROI, or tools, I was getting asked questions about influencers. And it was really the first time. It was when I taught I was a guest lecturer at an MBA class on digital marketing at USC here in Los Angeles. And at the end of my presentation, it was a general social media marketing presentation. Almost all the questions were not just about influencer marketing and tapping into influencers, but also these marketers in the room were saying, how do I become more of an influencer? Because they had friends that were monetizing their Instagram or what have you. So I thought that there might be something there. And I started to, think about a book, and then someone contacted me. Now, Bob, before we started this conversation, you mentioned how you get a lot of people asking to be on your podcast. And I'm the same way. I get people asking for all sorts of things from me, as you can imagine. But one guy named Lee Constantine reached out, and he said, I have this startup called Publishizer. I come from the publishing world. And the idea about Publishizer is if you have a book idea, you throw it out there, and it's a Kickstarter. And you can basically start to get money for your book, get pre-orders without even writing the book. And so I go, He goes, Neal, just use it to test market your idea. Give it a try. And I did. I test marketed an idea for this book about influencer marketing. At the time, it was called The Age of Influence. And I ended up selling a few hundred copies without writing the book. So that was my test market. It was successful. And as I delve deeper into the subject, we're now into 2018, 2019, where I wrote most of the book. I realized that marketers were completely misled and miseducated as to what really was influencer marketing and how it wasn't just about Instagram or TikTok. It was relevant to any social network. It wasn't just about influencing Gen Z and millennials. You could influence baby boomers and Gen X. It wasn't just about photo and video. It was also about blog. It was also about podcast. So the more research I did and interviews I did and just more, doing my best to be innovative, because if I want to do something, I want to add value. I ended up writing what ended up becoming The Age of Influence. And I was very close to working with a publisher from the Netherlands who was going to create a Dutch version before the English version, believe it or not. And right when that happened, I serendipitously got introduced to HarperCollins Leadership, which is one of the biggest business book publishers. They work with Gary Vee and what have you. And I was able to secure a contract with them, and the rest is history. So in March of this year, the book came out. It was renamed The Age of Influence from The Business of Influence, the original name. And so far I've gotten really, great feedback. And, since a lot of the book was written in 2019 because of the way the publishing world works, I knew the book wouldn't come out for a while. So I really painstakingly worked hard to ensure that the concepts would be as evergreen as possible, so that when this book comes out a year later, it would still have relevance. And 5 years from now, it would still have relevance. And I think from the feedback I've gotten, I feel like I've been able to do that. But now, similar to how I got closure before, I'm already thinking about my next book, Bob. And I think this whole coronavirus pandemic has gotten a lot of us thinking. But, I see influence. If I was to tell you what my next book is going to be on, like I said, I'm still conceptualizing. Influence, I think, is one of the biggest things that most businesses just haven't figured out. They haven't leveraged. Only a very, very small percentage of maybe really aggressive B2C startups on Instagram, for instance, have been really good at leveraging it. But most brands, especially in B2B, have not. But it's not all about influencer marketing either, right? I always say social media replaces nothing. It complements everything. So influence is one piece of the puzzle. I believe it can be really impactful because companies have such underutilized it. But you still need social media. You still need content. There's all these other ingredients that go into the mix to create that perfect recipe. And that's sort of the next book that I'm thinking of is, more of this going back to maximize your social, but, more broadly about digital, and really bringing all these concepts together to help companies create their own unique digital recipes for their business. That's this is the first time I've ever really talked about the book publicly, actually, Bob, but that's how far, I just, if I'm going to do something, I want to be innovative and I want to add value. So I appreciate the fact that, getting back to the original question, that you thought that I was first to market on some of this stuff. It really just comes down to the experiences that I've had with my customers. But it also goes back to something that really influenced me when Steve Jobs passed away, that Stanford University graduation speech where he talks about connecting the dots. And it's that connecting the dots and going back into my own history, both as a professional and even further back into, the music that I grew up with or experiences I had traveling when I was in university. It leads me to greater insight. It actually leads me to innovation, right? And from there, I try to create something unique that no one's ever heard of, and I try to test it and see if it resonates. To me, podcasting gives me the ability to do that. My blog posts, which I try to blog weekly, are more, I won't say they're for SEO, but they're more, they're not necessarily the thought leadership type of content. My podcast is where I want to establish myself first as a thought leader. It's where I will speak future ideas and test out future ideas and see if they have a flow to them. So remaining creative in an ever-changing world of social media is not easy, but I think we can all do that once we find our own sources for inspiration, which for me is really just working with clients, looking around at what I see and then connecting those dots has been a really, really great formula for me. So I don't know if there's a perfect formula for everybody, but that sort of explains a lot of, what I've done. But I'd say the other part of that is serving my community, serving my customers, serving my readers, always having that in the back of my mind. So, if people aren't going to ask me about TikTok and I don't see the immediate value because I don't think my clients are on TikTok, I'm not going to start blogging about TikTok because everybody else is talking about TikTok. If everybody's talking about Facebook Messenger marketing, yes, I'll give it a look. But if I don't think it's more compelling than email marketing for a variety of reasons, I may not necessarily talk a lot about that. Because I want to keep balance. And if I just do what everybody else is doing and catch on to every trend that everybody else is catching on to, there's no value to my clients, and there's no value that I'm providing as well. So I tend to be selective as to, what I talk about, what I recommend. And that so far has served me well. It's prevented me from wasting a lot of time that you could be wasting. So I'm sort of old school. While everybody talks about TikTok, I still stick to the tried and tested. LinkedIn is still an amazing network for business. Facebook obviously is still amazing. Instagram is still amazing. So, you go over to TikTok, there's still a lot of business and a lot of, people to be found that are still active on these other networks.
I think when I do look at a lot of things like TikTok, I often feel I see a lot of people chasing a tactic without any real strategic direction behind it. And I think that's really almost what you were talking about there is a strategy. There are universal principles of digital marketing. And sometimes these faddy tools can be a bit of a distraction. They're not inherently wrong. They work. Don't get me wrong, but your average business shouldn't be distracted by those to the detriment of solid strategy. Absolutely.
The new shiny object syndrome, right?
Yeah.
Every marketer falls to. So yeah, I agree with you. It does come down to that strategy, and it does come down to really critical thinking. So who is on TikTok, and are people leaving other networks to go on TikTok, or is it an additional network? And then even if I was to be on TikTok, what would that content look like? For most businesses, it's obviously going to be a struggle. And I sort of putting my social media history professor hat on, I would say that this is very similar to Snapchat. It's a young generation. It's probably people that were using Snapchat that also use Instagram are also on TikTok. And I don't know if it'll go like Snapchat really failed to go beyond a generation. I don't know how far TikTok is going to go. And therefore, we don't know the future, but we can control how much we invest in it now. And one thing I like to say, Bob, is you're never too late. If you were to get on the LinkedIn now as a new user, as a new company, you can still get really impressive results. It's not like you have to be there 10 years. Being there early helps, don't get me wrong. But I like to say you're never too late for any social network. So you can always jump back into TikTok a year from now. You may not be one of the early adopters, but for every early adopter that gets a big following, there's way more that never get that following that are going to do the same if they came in later. So that's always been my philosophy on these things.
If it's all right with you, something I would like to speak about is obviously when you observe people on social media, you see the effect, not the cause. And by that, I mean, you see the veneer of people's business, what they appear to be doing. And when I watch you on social media, you're in Japan one day, you could be anywhere. I remember watching you in London, and you had hired this really nice girl to take some pictures of you. And I now follow her on Instagram. She's going to be working for me.
Oh, that's excellent. Oh, she's great. Yes.
It's a fantastic idea. Why have I never thought of that? When you travel, hire a photographer, get some pictures taken. But what?
Yeah, these were some of the secrets of influencers that I was doing research. I realized that, the notion of hiring a photographer to do a photo shoot, get 100 photos. I think from that photo shoot, I got maybe 120. And if you post once a day, you have 3 to 4 months of content. And that's what a lot of influencers will do. They'll hire a photographer every quarter to take those types of photos. Not necessarily when they're on travel. It could be in their home office or in, the nearby environment where they live. But yeah, it's a great idea.
However, a lot of the time that's all you see of people. And when I have somebody like you, I would quite like to understand what's going on under the bonnet in your world, or under the hood, as you would say in America. So I'm curious to know, you have client work going on, you have speaking. Can we maybe just have a little walk through what does your day-to-day work sphere look like?
Well, the work sphere every day is never the same. And I'd say now it's very different because of the coronavirus pandemic. So if we had connected a year ago where I was doing a lot of traveling, and for instance, at the beginning of March, I spoke at Social Media Marketing World in San Diego. I then came home for a night, then went to Orlando, Florida to go to PodFest, my first podcasting conference. And I got back home March 10th, and then the whole pandemic, came here in the United States. I was supposed to have spoken in Belgrade and Mexico City in May, which those events obviously got postponed. So right now, it's going to be very, very different. But I divide my work into two. I have client work and I have my work. And my goal has always been, how do I get the most money for my client work for the least amount of time so that I have the most amount of time to spend on my work? So that's why, and I started as a consultancy, and one of my brothers who's an entrepreneur said, Neal, consultancies don't scale. And he's right. I never wanted to do the agency. First of all, for me, philosophically, I was sort of opposed to it when it comes to social media. Now, I've grown up a bit since then, and I realized that if companies don't have the resource I can provide, I would rather do it for them than have them hire someone that is not as well-versed, as I am. So I've gotten over that. And in 2016, I did have a client that said, Neal, love the strategy. Can we hire you to do this all for me? So I had already built up, I have a staff that supports me on various projects, my own as well as my clients. And I have the tools, the processes. So I started doing that, and it went really, really well. But, I realized after doing that for a year or two that the time invested and the money that I got, while it is scalable, right, it still wasn't worth my idea of my value and how much I should be getting for every hour of work I put in. That's why I love to speak, because on average for an hour of work, and yes, there's preparation and there's travel and everything, I tend to get paid the most. But what I've realized, Bob, now that you're asking me, and it's, as we record this, it's about August of 2020, what I really enjoy doing, I'm getting back to my roots, right? Connecting those dots of, I really enjoy the strategy and education. And I find the best way that I can do that is not as part of some project that a company outsources to me, but being part of their team. So it's more of a fractional CMO role. And this is something that I have been, I've been ramping this up, and I've gotten many new customers since the coronavirus pandemic hit me or hit the United States. And companies just need more help with their digital, right? I'm sure you've probably seen that in the UK as well.
Yeah.
So that's a role where I'm getting deep experience working together with companies. I have deep impact because now I can guarantee that they're going to do what I teach them to do, which if I just did strategy consulting, I can't. And I can get paid more by the hour. I can get paid, enough money so that I could work 3 days a week and live very, 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 very comfortably. And that's always been my goal over the past 6 to 12 months once I realized this. So with working 3 days a week, and because it is a time that is spent together with a client, there's no homework per se. There's no overtime per se, right? So it allows me to have a clean cut and have an off button, which is very critical when you work from home. Especially I have a 15-year-old and a 13-year-old. One of the reasons why I do what I do is to spend time with my family, right? And watch my kids grow up. So it gives me the ability to do that. And it gives me, 2 days a week, if I don't have a full schedule, to pursue all these other things that I do. So my blogging, my podcasting, speaking opportunities that come up. Now they're obviously virtual. So, Bob, now with the pandemic, because I don't have that travel, and even some of my fractional CMO clients, I would travel to their offices locally. I don't need to do that. So I've had so much time. It's almost been like a renaissance in terms of me being able to develop content and ideas. But it also means for the first time, I've been able to properly promote my book. Because as you said, if I'm one of the first to market, I sort of want to own the space. So I just want to do what I can do to get the word out about my book. And, it's my own exercise in influencer marketing, of tapping into influencers like Bob Gentle has this great podcast, or bloggers or what have you. So I like to do things in sprints. My first 90-day sprint was, I had these ideas, and now I'm in my sort of second 30-day or 90-day sprint. And for me to get closure, I want to say, okay, I want to get to a certain number of Amazon reviews, or I want to appear on a certain number of podcasts, or I want to make sure that everybody I mentioned in my book I interviewed, they all got sent a book. It's little things like this, but they're KPIs that say, if I can hit these goals, then I know that I would have done my best. I would have left no stone unturned, and then I can get closure and move on to the next avenue where I want to go, which is this next book and sort of a digital product or a digital mastermind or masterclass that goes together with it. So now those extra 2 days, and because, as I mentioned before we started recording, Bob, I've gotten really into podcasting, and it's really exciting because I started by finding 10 podcasts to listen to, and I found them on Apple Podcasts, just doing searches, as well as people who are listening to my show, what other podcasts might they be listening to. And for the first time, one of those 10 podcasts, I'm going to be a guest on for the first time. And one of the 10 podcasts, I actually had them as a guest on my podcast. It was just the most exciting thing, right? I mean, they're not like, I think of like the social media marketing podcast, these iconic podcasts that, Pat Flynn, they're like top 5 business podcasts worldwide. They're not like that at all. But to me, they're my heroes. They're, that I've been listening to them. And with podcasts, you create such an intimate relationship with people. So it's really, as I tell people, in crisis, there's opportunity. And this pandemic has given me the opportunity to double down on promoting my book, on writing more and more great content, and obviously doing more podcasting, but also developing more relationships, whether it's, recording this podcast with you, Bob, or with others out there in social media, other content creators. And, my definition, once you finish reading The Age of Influence, at the end of the day, every content creator is an influencer. Some have more influence than others, but only 1% of social media users are content creators, right? So every content creator has, influences through their content. And I want to meet as many of them and offer as much value as I can to all of them. So that's sort of what gets me through my day. But hopefully that gives you some idea as to how I work. And I do have a to-do list, which I started doing this year, where every day, do X number of this, Y of that. These projects that don't appear in my Gmail inbox, they don't appear on my Google Calendar, like writing the book. These are things that I put down there as reminders of I want to make this much progress on this week. And it's a very old school way of managing my calendar, but I seem to be very effective with it. So that's sort of what my days look like.
That's a very good answer. And to be honest, the only area where there's no light being shone yet is, can you give me an idea of what your team looks like now? Is it a virtual team, permanent, fixed team?
So I've always worked virtually. And it's the same thing where when I launched my blog in 2008 and started to see that I was getting traffic all over the world, there were other people that were speaking on LinkedIn, but they stayed very local. They wanted to own the local Orange County, California market, which at 3 million people is quite a big market. But I always thought global. Once you publish content on the internet or a podcast, you're global. It can be consumed everywhere. So with that in mind, I've always wanted to tap into resources globally. So I have a team of specialists. Like I said, when they don't have client work, they work on my work. So beginning with a podcast editor, which is one of the people I'm most indebted to.
Oh, you need a podcast editor.
Yeah. And, it's funny because I use Buzzsprout for my host, and they have a fantastic Facebook community. And all these people, they just spend hours talking about all the audio edits they do. And I'm thinking, why don't you put that time into the content, right? Into your podcast. So, it's about working more on your business rather than in your business. So I do have that sort of critical resource. I do have someone that helps me with blogging / WordPress / SEO, more on sort of the content management side. I do have writers that I work with, where there's one especially that I tend to work with more frequently than others. I also have, I guess you could call sort of a social media marketing assistant / graphics person that helps with a lot of the graphics that are created. So it's always a team of, 4 or 5. And instead of hiring a general virtual assistant like a lot of solopreneurs do or entrepreneurs, it's really about finding key people that have key skill sets that I can use for those skill sets. So these are people that are not working for me full time, but they're freelancers, but they have the ability to ramp up when necessary, assuming they're not at full capacity. And I found that for me works very, very well in doing what I'm doing. And then when there are client projects, pulling them in as necessary. So if people are listening, that are interested in this, there's a whole world of qualified people out there that especially if you live in a developed economy. Not everybody I work with is located outside the United States. Some are in the United States for quality reasons, but for other things that are just easily repeatable tasks that you can teach people, things like Fiverr, things like Upwork. I mean, between the two of them, and I know it's not easy to find the right person. You're going to make a lot of mistakes along the way, but once you find the right people, it really helps you scale. And that's the secret to how I've been able to scale. Even though my consultancy doesn't scale, I've been able to scale my work and be able to charge more and more and take on more clients because of that. And because I'm very much into processes and very much into tools as well, because obviously I ran a conference on the subject. So processes, tools, people, right? And it's the people that I think a lot of entrepreneurs and solopreneurs are scared to hire. So you don't need to hire full time. You could start at 5 hours a week. You can start by project only when you have work. But if you're not doing that, you're not going to be able to grow and you're not going to be able to spend more time on your business. So I'm always trying to find ways of replicating what I do into a process and teaching someone to do that and giving me time to do something that has more impact.
That's a really good answer. And I think anybody who wants to break that skill trap, I think you'd call it, of thinking that you have to hire lots of permanent people and have an office. Chris Tucker's Virtual Freedom is a masterwork on how to escape that. It was a big day for me when I read that book.
Yeah, and I'd say that's it's funny because that's something that I think is missing in a lot of education that's out there as well. To your question, exactly how do you do all this? Who is your staff? What are they doing? Are they full? There's not a lot of people. Chris obviously talks a lot about this. When I work with clients, obviously, and this is part of this community I want to create, I really want to share this and help people do what I've been able to do and find those key people that can really help. So, Chris, obviously, it's funny because I didn't really know much about Chris until I started speaking with more UK podcasters and UK people in social media and listening to more podcasts where obviously his name comes up quite a bit. And it's just an example and Pat Flynn, I didn't really know either. I mean, I knew he was a podcaster. I had no idea how influential he was. It's just, these are the influencers to us, like our kids who are watching YouTubers and that we've never heard of. It's a similar thing, right? It falls in this concept of influence. But yeah, I've never read Virtual Freedom, but I'm looking it up on the internet as we speak. And so you recommend that over? I think Youpreneur is also one that he's very well known for, right?
Yeah, there's Virtual Freedom and then there's Rise of the Youpreneur.
Right.
They're quite different. Virtual Freedom's about building virtual teams. Rise of the Youpreneur is very much about building, marketing, and monetizing your personal brand /influence.
Gotcha. Perfect.
Which I think is quite interesting because you said consultancy doesn't really scale. Yours doesn't scale. However, you have scaled it as much as you can because it scales in direct proportion to your personal brand or your influence. The more influential or brand capital you've got, the more people are willing to pay for your time.
Yeah, you scale by your price. And if you think of it that way, yes, there is a limit, but I also have that speaking. I also teach at a few universities. I have, revenue streams from books, and I have brands that reach out to me as an influencer. Some of those, if I find it serves my community, I'll do as well. So I also have that other sort of upside income on the side.
Yeah. I think what's interesting is you have choices. And I think a lot of people have very few choices. And because you've built this personal brand, you've built this influence, you have choices other people don't have.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And this gets back to, obviously I'm in this for a business and I want to make it as profitable as possible. But there's also the lifestyle. For me, the lifestyle is being able to make that choice, is being able to make the choice that, no, I don't think that you're the right fit for my business, my consultancy, or being able to say, I want to block out Fridays on my calendars because I want to have that time with family and only schedule all my client meetings Monday to Thursday. So I believe being an entrepreneur gives you that luxury of choice in how to manage your time, which was really critical for me. I think a lot of entrepreneurs forget about that, and they think they just need to be on all the time. And I think you forget about the reason you became an entrepreneur. I was a punk rocker growing up. So one of my first concerts was seeing The Clash back in the day. And, maybe I was a little bit anti-authoritarian, which is why I never maybe fit in that corporate world. And where I fit was I had my own company within a company, right? Like my own entrepreneurial journey. So for me, being an entrepreneur is being able to make those choices and having the freedom of time. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs start out with the same mindset, but somewhere along the line, they forget about that. And to me, just hiring an overarching staff and having, lots of clients where if on any given day at any given hour, if there's a mistake in a tweet or some crisis, that's going to eat away at my freedom. I'm going to become a slave to the tweet, as I like to say. And I never wanted that to happen. And I realized with my agency that some of that was sort of starting to happen. So yeah, there's a book by Marie Kondo, who either you know of her or you don't, but it's all about like living the organized life, and she teaches you how to declutter your home and your workspace, and it's very simple. You go through every single thing that you have, and you look at it and you say, does it give me? Am I passionate about this? Does it make me feel good or not?
Does it spark joy, I think.
Does it spark joy? Yes, thank you. I haven't read it in a while. Does it spark joy? And if not, you got to get rid of it. You got to keep things around you that only spark joy. So I like to apply that concept to my work. And I think that's a really, really good way to describe what I did and what I recommend everybody else listening do as well.
Well, Neal, I think that's a brilliant place to wrap up. I'm looking at the clock and I know you have appointments shortly, but it's been a delight to meet you. I'd like to spend time with you. If people want to get in touch with you, if they want to connect with you, how would you like them to do that?
Well, my name is Neal Schaffer. I am the real Neal. So it's Neal. I know in that part of the world, there's a lot of Neil Neals, or Niel, as the baristas at Starbucks in London would do. But Neal, and then it's Schaffer. There's a few Schaffers of us. I don't know why, but there's a lot of us that lurk in sales and marketing. So it's Schaffer. So I'm Neal Schaffer. Everywhere on social media. Yes, I'm on TikTok. I may not get back to you quickly if you message me there, but I also have my website, nealschaffer.com. I have a podcast if you're interested in learning more about this perspective on influence and how it applies to digital and social media marketing. You can find that Maximize Your Social Influence. And then my new book is called The Age of Influence. I know a number of people have bought it in the UK, so it's available at on Amazon and wherever. And I'd love for you to read it and let me know what you think.
I'll put links to all your things in the show notes. So if you're listening, just scroll down to the show notes and they will be there. Neal, I always wrap up with one question, and I didn't give you any warning. I haven't been very good at warning people recently. But what's one thing you do now that you wish you'd started 5 years ago?
I wish that I would have more intent in what I do. I think that once you put yourself out there in digital, whether it's a podcast, a blog, what have you, a lot of people contact you for a lot of different things. In some ways, I've been blessed because I've never had to prospect for business, Bob. It's come my way. I've never had to apply to speak at events. They've always invited me to speak, for instance. But a lot of good things have happened from that, but a lot of things that have wasted time have happened as well, as you can imagine. And although I try to become a better filter as to what I should and shouldn't do, I just wish earlier on in my career, I had a little bit more intent, a little bit more, this is the direction I want to go, and this is going to define the things that I do or don't do. I'm not going to do it on the spot based on the opportunity. And if I'd done that a little bit earlier, I think I might be in a slightly different place. I like to live a life of no regrets, Bob. I tell my kids the same thing. I don't regret any choice I've made. I've done my best. And yes, we all make mistakes, and I'll continue to make mistakes. But a mistake and a regret are two different things. So even though, yes, I wish I would have done that, I have no regrets.
That's a fantastic place to leave it. Neal Schaffer, thank you very much. You've been a fantastic guest.
Oh, I'm honored. Thank you so much for having me, Bob.
With only 1% of social media users actually creating content, it's very easy to stand out. Doing so consistently takes some discipline and willpower as well as a bit of creativity, but not as much as you might think. Like Darren Hardy shows in his book The Compound Effect, small deliberate actions taken over time lead up to a disproportionately large effect. Before I go, just a quick reminder to subscribe. And if you haven't already, join our Facebook group. You'll find a link in the show notes, or visit amplifyme.fm/insiders. I would love for you to connect with me on social media. You can follow me wherever you hang out. You'll find me at Bob Gentle. And if you do, message me, let me know, and I can follow you back. If you've enjoyed the show, then as always, I would love for you to review it on iTunes. It means a lot, and it's the best way to help me reach more subscribers. My name's Bob Gentle. Thanks to Neal for giving us his time this week, and to you for listening, and I'll see you next week.